Some pain cuts so deep that time can't wash it away, only covers it like sediment over a shipwreck. Some wounds never heal. They just scab over and you learn to live with the ache. Even now, 60 years later, the sound of a slamming door can send me spiraling back to that farmhouse in Idaho. The taste of copper flooding my mouth as I curled into myself, trying to disappear. My name is Elena Ramirez Santos. I'm 78 years old now, living in a small cottage in Portland with a garden I tend every morning and a porch swing where I watch the seasons change. To my neighbors, I'm just the sweet elderly woman who bakes cinnamon bread for newcomers and keeps hard candies in her purse for their grandchildren. The silver-haired lady with kind eyes and careful hands who volunteers at the library reading to children. They see my smile, my calm demeanor, the peaceful retirement I've carved out after decades of quiet determination. They don't see the nightmares that still visit me after all these years. They don't know about the locked drawer in my bedroom that contains the only photograph I have from before. A faded snapshot of a solemn-faced girl with long, dark braids and eyes too old for her face. They don't know about the 17-year-old girl who once stood trembling in a borrowed white dress, eyes downcast, as her parents exchanged handshakes with a man nearly 20 years her senior, sealing a bargain that would steal her youth, her dreams, and nearly her life. They don't see the grandmother of 5 who still can't bear to have anyone stand behind her, who taught her daughters and granddaughters to always have their own money, their own keys, their own escape plan. This is my story, not of the girl who was traded like property in 1963, but of the woman who fought her way back to herself through 6 decades of rebuilding. It begins in darkness, but I promise you, there is light ahead. I was born in 1947 in a speck of a mining town in northern Idaho, nestled in a valley so narrow that winter sunlight only reached us for a few hours each day. Mica Springs wasn't on most maps, just a collection of weatherboard houses, a general store that doubled as the post office, and the silver mine that employed most of the men, my father included. We lived in a 2-bedroom house at the edge of town, the last place before the forest swallowed up the road. 6 children slept in one room, 3 boys in one bed, 3 girls in another. My parents took the other bedroom. The kitchen stove was the only reliable heat source in winter, when temperatures plunged so low that water froze in glasses beside our beds. Papa worked the mine 6 days a week, disappearing before dawn and returning after dark, his lungs gradually turning to stone from the dust. Mama took in laundry for the mine supervisor's family and the school teacher, scrubbing sheets on a washboard until her hands cracked and bled in the winter air. Being the eldest daughter meant I was essentially Mama's assistant from the time I could walk. By 10, I could cook a full meal, mind my younger siblings, tend the vegetable garden, and help with the endless laundry, all while trying to keep up with school lessons. School was a luxury I experienced in snatches. During winter months when the garden lay dormant under snow, I'd walk the 2 miles to our 1-room schoolhouse. But spring planting, summer tending, and fall harvest kept me home more often than not. Despite this, I loved learning. Miss Abernathy, our teacher, said I had a mind like a steel trap and often sent books home with me. I'd read them by candlelight after my siblings fell asleep, traveling to distant lands through pages worn thin from many readers before me. I dreamed of becoming a teacher myself one day, of seeing the ocean, of wearing a dress that hadn't belonged to someone else first. Dreams were free, after all, the only things in our life that were. The winter of 1963 was especially bitter in Mica Springs. The mine had cut hours after a partial collapse, and Papa's paychecks shrank just as the snow piled higher. My brother Thomas had taken ill with a chest infection that wouldn't clear, and the doctor's visits and medicine drained what little savings we had. I'd catch Mama crying when she thought no one was looking, silently calculating how to stretch beans and cornmeal for another day. We weren't the poorest family in town. The Hendersons had lost their father in the mine accident, and the widow took in ironing with 4 little ones underfoot. But we balanced on the knife edge of disaster. One bad turn could tip us over. I was 16 then, having abandoned my schooling completely to help keep the family afloat. I'd taken on mending for the mine manager's wife, earning a few extra coins with my neat stitches. Sometimes, if I finished early, Mrs. Campbell would let me borrow books from her shelf, real hardcover books that smelled of leather and paper rather than the worn school books with missing pages I was used to. It was from those books that I learned about college, about women becoming doctors and lawyers and scientists, about lives so different from the one I was living that they might as well have been fairy tales. "You're a smart girl, Elena," Mrs. Campbell said once, watching me read. "It's a shame you're not in school anymore." I shrugged, embarrassed by her attention. "Family needs me," I mumbled. "There are scholarships, you know," she continued, pouring tea into delicate cups I was afraid to hold. "For bright girls like you. My sister's girl got one to study nursing in Boise." For days afterward, I turned the idea over in my mind like a smooth stone, polishing it with possibility. Perhaps I could find a way to finish school, to apply for one of these scholarships. Perhaps there was a path out of Mica Springs that didn't require abandoning my family completely. I never got the chance to find out. It was a Tuesday morning in March when everything changed. The snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of mud and last year's dead grass. I was in the kitchen kneading dough for bread, flour dusting my arms to the elbows, when I heard Papa call my name. "Elena, come here, girl." Something in his voice made me freeze, hands still buried in the sticky dough. It wasn't anger. I knew that tone well enough, but something else. Something that made the hair on my arms rise despite the heat from the stove. I looked at Mama, who stood at the sink washing breakfast dishes. Her back was to me, shoulders rigid, hands moving mechanically over the plates. She wouldn't turn around. "Mama," I whispered. "Go on," she said, voice flat. "Your father's waiting." I wiped my hands on my apron, heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. In the front room, Papa sat in his chair by the window, the only comfortable seat in the house. He wasn't a large man, my father, but years of hard labor had made him solid as the rock he mined, face weathered and creased like old leather. He wasn't alone. A man sat opposite him, perched awkwardly on our three-legged stool. I recognized him immediately. Mr. Victor Blackwood, owner of the mercantile store where we bought supplies on credit when times were tight. He was in his late 30s, a widower whose wife had died in childbirth 2 years earlier, leaving him with a young son. He owned not just the store but rental properties throughout the county and had recently bought shares in the mine. "There she is," Papa said, gesturing me forward. "Come in, Elena." I stepped into the room, conscious suddenly of my worn dress, my rough hands, the smudge of flour likely on my cheek. Mr. Blackwood's eyes traveled over me in a way that made me want to wrap my arms around myself. "Sir," I managed, nodding slightly. "Elena," Papa began, clearing his throat, "Mr. Blackwood has made us an offer, a very generous offer." The words hung in the air, and I knew with a sudden sick certainty what was coming next. "You'll be married on Sunday," Papa said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "Reverend Thomas has agreed to conduct the service after regular morning worship." The room tilted sideways. I gripped the door frame to steady myself, sure I had misheard. "Married? Mr. Blackwood needs a wife," Papa continued, as if explaining something simple to a child. "Someone to keep his house and mind his boy. He's taken a liking to you, watching you at church and in the store." I looked at Mr. Blackwood, who offered what I suppose he thought was a reassuring smile. His teeth were stained from tobacco, one incisor capped in gold that caught the weak March sunlight. "I'll provide well for you, Elena," he said, his voice oily smooth. "No more patched dresses or working your fingers to the bone. You'll have help in the house. Mrs. Pembroke comes to clean twice weekly. And young Timothy needs a mother's touch." I thought of Timothy Blackwood, a solemn 5-year-old with perpetually runny nose who was known for pinching smaller children at Sunday school. I thought of Mr. Blackwood's house on the hill, the largest in Mica Springs, with its imposing front door and curtained windows that revealed nothing of the life inside. "I can't," I whispered, looking desperately toward Papa. "I don't want to get married. I'm only 16. 17 next month," Papa countered. "Same age your mother was when we wed. Same age most girls around here marry." "But I don't love him," I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. The sound of Papa's hand slapping the arm of his chair made me flinch. "Love?" he scoffed. "You think life is one of those novels you're always reading? Love doesn't fill empty bellies or pay the doctor? Mr. Blackwood has agreed to clear our debt at his store, all of it. And he's offering a position for Thomas at the mercantile once he's recovered. Inside work, Elena, no mind dust." Behind me, I heard Mama's step in the hallway. I turned to her, eyes pleading, but her face was a mask of resignation. "It's a good match," she said softly. "Better than most girls around here can hope for." I looked from her face to Papa's to Mr. Blackwood's and understood with perfect clarity. I had already been sold. Before I continue with what happened next, I want to pause and ask, where are you watching this from? It still amazes me, even after all these years, that technology allows me to share my story with people across the country, maybe even around the world. Places I've only read about in books or seen in movies. When I was that terrified 17-year-old girl, I felt completely alone, as if no one in the world could possibly understand what I was going through. Now I know differently. Too many women have stories like mine, different in details perhaps, but the same in essence. Stories of having their autonomy stripped away, of being treated as property rather than people. If my story resonates with you, whether because you've experienced something similar or because you care about those who have, please consider subscribing to this channel and sharing this video. Every time a story like mine is heard, it helps another woman understand she isn't alone. It helps another girl recognize warning signs before it's too late. It helps change the narrative about what we as a society consider acceptable. And if you're watching this and you're currently in a situation where you feel trapped or afraid, please know that there are resources available now that didn't exist in my time. There are people who will believe you, who will help you. I'll include some information in the description below. The next part of my story is difficult to tell, even after all these decades. The days leading up to my wedding were a blur of numb preparation. Mama altered her own wedding dress to fit me, taking in the waist and letting out the bodice, her needle flashing in the lamplight as I sat frozen beside her. My sisters, not understanding the gravity of the situation, were excited about the prospect of a wedding, of their big sister becoming a proper lady with a house of her own. Only my brother Thomas, still weak from his illness but clear-eyed, seemed to understand my despair. "You don't have to do this, Lena," he whispered one night as I brought him tea for his cough. "We'll figure something out." But what choice did I really have? Where could I go with no money, no education, no connections beyond our tiny town? The morning of my wedding dawned cold but clear, sunlight streaming through the frost-laced windows of our small house. I had barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling, listening to my sister's steady breathing beside me, trying to memorize the feeling of being surrounded by family, by people who, despite everything, loved me. I rose before anyone else, dressing quietly in my everyday clothes before slipping outside. The mountains loomed against the pale sky, snow-capped and indifferent to human suffering. I walked to the large pine tree at the edge of our property, the one I'd climbed countless times as a child, and looked up at its sprawling branches. Acting on impulse, I hitched up my skirt and began to climb. My hands remembered the familiar handholds, the sturdy branches that had supported me through years of seeking solitude. Near the top, where the tree began to sway slightly with my weight, I settled on a wide branch and looked out over Mica Springs. From this height, I could see the entire town spread below. The mine entrance to the north, the cluster of houses, the church steeple, and yes, the Blackwood residence on its small hill, separated from the rest of us by more than just distance. Beyond the town lay the road that led to larger cities, to places I'd only read about. A wild thought seized me. What if I just left? What if I walked out of Mica Springs and never looked back? Thought I might find you up there. I started at the voice, nearly losing my balance. Looking down, I saw Maggie Campbell, the mine manager's wife, standing at the base of the tree. She wasn't dressed in her usual fine clothes, but wore a practical coat and sturdy boots. "Mrs. Campbell? Come down, Elena. I need to speak with you." Curious, I made my way back to the ground. Up close, I could see that Mrs. Campbell's face was drawn with concern, her usual composed demeanor replaced by something urgent. "I heard about the wedding," she said without preamble. "Is it true? Your father arranged for you to marry Victor Blackwood?" I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Do you want this marriage, Elena?" No one had asked me that question, not directly, not expecting an honest answer. Tears sprang to my eyes and I shook my head. "I thought as much," she sighed. "I've known Victor Blackwood for 15 years. He's not a kind man, especially to those he considers beneath him. His first wife?" She hesitated. "Well, there were rumors." "I don't have a choice," I whispered. Mrs. Campbell reached into her pocket and pressed something into my hand. "Everyone has choices, Elena. Some are just harder than others." I looked down to see a small envelope sealed with wax. "Inside is $50 and the address of my sister in Boise," she said quietly. "She runs a boarding house for young women. If you can get to her, she'll help you find work, maybe even finish your schooling." For hours after Mrs. Campbell left, I sat beneath the pine tree, the envelope burning a hole in my pocket. $50. More money than I'd ever possessed at once. Enough for a bus ticket to Boise and food along the way. Enough for a chance at something different. But the thought of leaving my family, especially Thomas still weak from his illness, twisted my stomach into knots. If I fled, what would happen to them? Would Mr. Blackwood demand repayment of the debts he'd forgiven? Would he take out his anger on my family? The sun climbed higher, reminding me that time was running short. Soon, Mama would be looking for me to prepare for the ceremony. The dress would be waiting, the borrowed shoes, the wild daisies my sisters had picked the previous evening to make a crown for my hair. I made my way back to the house, mind racing. Through the window, I could see Mama at the stove, my sisters setting the table for breakfast, Papa reading last week's newspaper by the window. The normalcy of the scene struck me as obscene given what they were preparing to do. Inside, no one commented on my early morning walk. Breakfast was a silent affair, tension stretching between us like piano wire. Afterward, as my sisters cleared the dishes, Papa pulled me aside. "You'll do right by Mr. Blackwood," he said, his voice low and final. "He's a respected man in this town. Don't bring shame on this family with any foolishness." I looked into my father's weathered face, searching for some sign of regret, some acknowledgement of what he was sacrificing, not his dreams, but mine. I found nothing but grim determination. "Yes, Papa," I said, the words ash in my mouth. The hours ticked by with agonizing slowness. Mama helped me bathe in the tin tub behind a screen in the kitchen, washing my hair with precious store-bought shampoo saved for special occasions. My sisters fluttered around me, excited by the break in routine, by the prospect of cake at the reception Mr. Blackwood had arranged at the church hall. As Mama fastened the buttons of her altered wedding dress up my back, I made my decision. I wouldn't be Victor Blackwood's wife. I wouldn't live in that house on the hill, isolated and owned. I wouldn't become like his first wife, subject to whatever rumors Mrs. Campbell had alluded to. "Mama," I said, turning to face her, "I need to get something from the Hendersons before the ceremony, a book I borrowed from Kate." Mama frowned. "Now? There's no time." "Please," I interrupted. "It will only take a few minutes. It's important to me." Perhaps something in my voice convinced her, or perhaps she was simply too exhausted by the day's emotions to argue. "Be quick," she sighed, "and don't dirty the dress." The Boise-bound bus left Mika Springs at 2:15 p.m., precisely when I was supposed to be saying my vows in the small white church. I boarded wearing my everyday dress and coat, my mother's wedding gown abandoned in Kate Henderson's bedroom, along with a hastily scribbled note explaining that I couldn't go through with the marriage. I'd given Kate my mother's silver locket, the only thing of value I owned, in exchange for her silence until the bus had departed. She promised to deliver the note to my family after the search for the missing bride inevitably began. "Good luck, Elena," she whispered, hugging me fiercely. "Write when you can." The bus was half empty, just a handful of travelers making the journey to the city on a Sunday afternoon. I took a seat near the back, heart pounding so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it. As the bus pulled away from the small depot, I kept my face turned toward the window, terrified of seeing Mr. Blackwood or my father racing to stop me. But no one came. The bus lumbered out of Micah Springs, leaving behind the only world I'd ever known. Reality set in as we crossed the county line. I had $50, the clothes on my back, and an address scribbled on a piece of paper. No luggage, no proper coat for the lingering Idaho winter, no guarantee that Mrs. Campbell's sister would even take me in. Night fell as the bus wound through mountain passes, and I pressed my forehead against the cold window, watching my reflection ripple over the dark landscape. What had I done? What kind of daughter abandons her family? What kind of sister leaves her siblings to face the consequences of her actions? Tears slid silently down my cheeks as the miles stretched between me and home. I thought of Thomas, how his face would fall when he realized I was gone. I thought of Mama, who had endured so much hardship only to see her eldest daughter throw away security and respectability. I thought of Papa, whose anger would be terrible to behold. The bus arrived in Boise shortly after midnight, depositing me on a street corner illuminated by a single lamppost. The station was closed until morning, a few other passengers quickly disappearing into waiting cars or down empty sidewalks. I stood clutching Mrs. Campbell's envelope, suddenly overwhelmed by the scale of the city around me. Buildings taller than any I'd seen before loomed against the night sky. The streets stretched in both directions, unfamiliar and intimidating. The address I held was meaningless without a map or knowledge of the city's layout. For the first time, fear outweighed determination. I was entirely alone in a strange place, a runaway bride with nowhere to go until morning. I found a bench partially sheltered from the wind and sat down, drawing my knees to my chest for warmth, fighting back panic. "You need help, honey." I looked up to see a woman in her 50s standing before me, concern etched in the lines around her eyes. She wore a waitress uniform under her coat, likely finishing a late shift. "I'm looking for Rosemont Boarding House," I said, my voice small in the empty street. "On Maple Street." She studied me for a moment, taking in my wrinkled dress, my lack of luggage, my obvious youth and distress. "That's my sister's place," I added quickly, the half-truth sticking in my throat. "Margaret Campbell's sister runs it. I'm expected." My life at Rosemont Boarding House began in a tiny attic room with sloped ceilings and a narrow bed, the kind of space reserved for charity cases, which was exactly what I was. Isabella Campbell, Mrs. Campbell's sister, had indeed taken me in after the kind waitress directed me to her doorstep that first night, but her welcome was cautious. "My sister has a soft heart," she told me, arms crossed as she assessed me in the parlor. "But I run a respectable establishment. No men, no alcohol, no coming and going at all hours. You break my rules, you're out. Understood?" I nodded, grateful for any roof over my head. "Margaret says you're bright, hardworking. We'll see. You can stay 2 weeks without charge while you find employment. After that, it's $5 weekly for room and board." Those first 2 weeks were a desperate scramble to find work in a city that overwhelmed me with its noise, its pace, its indifference to one more girl seeking opportunity. I walked until my shoes wore through, inquiring at shops, restaurants, offices, anywhere that might hire someone with my limited qualifications. Most doors closed as soon as I admitted I hadn't finished high school. A few men offered arrangements that made my skin crawl. By the end of the second week, with my deadline looming and Mrs. Campbell's money dwindling, I finally found work as a dishwasher at a diner 6 blocks from the boarding house. The work was grueling, 10 hours on my feet in a steaming kitchen, hands raw from hot water and harsh soap, for wages that barely covered my room and left pennies for necessities. But it was mine, chosen rather than forced upon me, and that made all the difference. Months passed in a blur of work and exhaustion. I wrote to Thomas once, a careful letter sent to Kate Henderson to deliver discreetly, letting him know I was safe but providing no details that could lead anyone to find me. I received no reply, unsure if my letter had reached him or if he was too angry to respond. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, my life expanded beyond mere survival. Doris, the cook at the diner, noticed how quickly I learned and began teaching me to prepare simple dishes during slow periods. By fall, I had been promoted to breakfast cook, the hours better, the pay slightly improved. At the boarding house, I made cautious friendships with other young women in similar circumstances. Martha from rural Oregon, fleeing an arranged marriage to her cousin. Betsy from Washington, determined to save enough to attend secretarial school. Jean from California, whose parents had disowned her for refusing to abandon her nursing studies for marriage. Together, we pooled resources and knowledge. Betsy taught us all to type on her second-hand typewriter. Jean helped with basic medical needs we couldn't afford to have treated professionally. Martha, a talented seamstress, altered donated clothes to fit us properly for job interviews and better positions. When Isabella Campbell mentioned that the local high school offered evening classes for adults seeking to complete their education, I seized the opportunity. 3 nights a week, after long shifts at the diner, I sat in a classroom learning algebra, literature, and science alongside others reaching for second chances. It wasn't easy. There were nights I fell asleep over textbooks, days when homesickness nearly drove me back to Mica Springs, moments when the fear of being found by Mr. Blackwood made me jump at shadows. But slowly, steadily, I was building something that felt like a future. By 1966, 3 years after stepping off that bus in Boise, my life had transformed in ways I could scarcely have imagined on that desperate wedding day. I had earned my high school diploma through night classes, the certificate framed proudly above my bed in a room I now shared with just one other woman, a step up from the attic space. The diner's owner, impressed by my reliability and cooking skills, had promoted me to assistant manager. My hands still bore calluses from work, but my spine had straightened, my voice had grown stronger, my eyes met those of others directly, instead of darting away in deference. In my small circle of friends, I was known for my level head in crises, my ability to stretch a dollar beyond its natural limits, and my fierce protection of anyone vulnerable. The new girls who arrived at Rosemont with haunted eyes and cardboard suitcases found in me a guide through those first terrifying weeks of independence. It was through one such newcomer that I learned what had happened after my departure from Mica Springs. Lily had arrived from a town 30 miles from my hometown, bearing gossip that had spread through the region. The Blackwood man went half mad when his bride disappeared, she told me over coffee in our shared room. Threatened to foreclose on half the businesses in town, including your father's debt. There was a terrible scene at your house. Him raging, your father shouting back. Then your brother stepped in. Thomas? My heart clenched with worry. Stood right up to Blackwood, told him no decent man would want an unwilling bride, that forcing a marriage was no better than other kinds of forcing. Said if Blackwood wanted to take out his wounded pride on the family, he'd have to answer to decent folks in town who knew right from wrong. Tears filled my eyes at the image of my gentle brother, barely recovered from illness, defending my choice. How did it end? I whispered. Your mama spoke up then, said her daughter wasn't property to be traded for debt, that she regretted ever allowing the arrangement. The whole town was talking about it. Blackwood backed down, couldn't risk his reputation. The debt stands, but your family's managing. Your brother works at the library now. Relief washed through me. They were all right. They understood. Maybe someday, when enough time had passed, I could write to them properly, perhaps even visit. That same year, I met David at the public library where I spent Sunday afternoons reading books I could never afford to buy. He was a chemistry teacher at the high school, quiet and thoughtful with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Our courtship was slow, careful, me wary of any man's attention, him patient enough to understand why. By 1968, we were married, a real marriage, entered freely with love and partnership as its foundation. David supported my decision to apply for college, celebrating when I received a partial scholarship to study education. We moved into a small apartment near campus, where I attended morning classes while working evenings at a campus cafe. Our daughter Sophia was born in 1970, followed by Michael in 1972. Both planned, both welcomed into a home built on mutual respect and gentle affection. As I held them, I made silent promises. They would always know their worth was inherent, not assigned by others. They would understand that love never diminishes freedom, but expands it. Now, sitting on my porch in Portland in the gentle evening light, I look back across the decades at the girl I was and the woman I became. The journey wasn't linear or simple. There were setbacks along the way, nightmares that persisted, trust that had to be rebuilt brick by brick, family relationships that took years to heal. I eventually reconciled with my parents, though it took until 1975, 12 years after I fled, for me to return to Mica Springs. By then, I was Professor Elena Mitchell, my teaching degree completed, my own classroom of students learning literature and composition at a community college in Oregon. My children were small but thriving, my marriage solid, my life unrecognizable from what it would have been had I not boarded that bus. The reunion was tearful, awkward, beautiful in its imperfection. My parents had aged dramatically, the mine dust finally claiming my father's lungs, though he lived long enough to meet his grandchildren. My mother embraced me with a fierceness that spoke of years of regret. "I should have protected you," she whispered against my hair. "I was wrong." Tomas, married by then with children of his own, simply hugged me and said, "I always knew you'd find your way." Mr. Blackwood was long gone, having lost his store to gambling debts and moved to Seattle. The house on the hill stood empty, windows boarded up, a fitting monument to thwarted possession. Looking back across the span of my life, from terrified bride to grandmother of 5, from 8th grade education to university professor, from property to person, I carry certain truths that I've passed to my children and students. Your body belongs only to you. Your choices, however difficult, are yours to make. Education is freedom. Financial independence is protection. Love that demands submission is not love at all. And perhaps most importantly, it is never too late to begin again. If my story has resonated with you, if it's helped you understand your own journey or that of someone you love, I ask one thing: share it. The world has changed since 1963, but not enough. Too many women still find themselves trapped in situations they didn't choose, believing they have no options. Remember that the most dangerous prison is the one built by believing you have no choice. There is always a choice, sometimes just between terrible options, yes, but even then, the act of choosing for yourself preserves something essential to humanity. If you're watching this from a place of safety and freedom, consider how you might extend that privilege to others. Support shelters, volunteer, donate, advocate for laws that protect the vulnerable. Listen when someone tells you they're afraid. And if you're watching this from a place of fear or constraint, know this: the girl who left everything behind on her wedding day was terrified. She had no guarantees, no clear path forward, just the unshakable knowledge that she deserved to write her own story. You deserve the same. Your journey may look different from mine, but it begins with the same step: choosing yourself. Thank you for listening to An Old Woman's Tale. Your support means my story continues to reach those who need to hear it most.